The memory system of computer is one of the most important part of computer. CPU uses this memory system to store and read data to give output. Fundamentally, there are two types of computer memory, primary memory and secondary memory. But what is primary memory and secondary memory? What are their uses and their types? And how does CPU uses these different type of memories like RAM, ROM and other storage devices? And also how these memories are different from each other. Let's see. There are two type of memory in computer, primary memory and secondary memory. Let's start with primary memory. Primary storage memory plays a very big role in computer because a computer can't start without primary memory. This type of memory also called main memory of computer. This memory is directly connected to CPU. So CPU uses this memory directly to retrieve or store data. Primary memory has very fast speed, so accessing data from it's very easy. The main two type of primary memory is RAM and ROM. We will talk about this in a while. We'll also talk about CPU registers and cache memory, which is also a form of primary memory. Before that, let's get a general idea of secondary memory. Secondary storage or external memory is not directly connected to the CPU. The computer uses its input-output channel to retrieve information from secondary storage into primary memory. So it takes more time to access data from secondary memory than primary memory. The secondary storage, also called non-volatile memory, because it retains its data even after removing the power supply. Secondary storage devices are important because they store your data permanently until it is overwritten or deleted. In computer, all of user files and data is stored in this memory. Also, secondary storage devices are very cheaper than primary memory. So usually secondary storage devices have more storage capacity than primary memory. But they are significantly slower to read or write than primary memory because they are not connected to CPU directly. There are lots of different secondary storage devices like magnetic storage based hard disk, floppy disk, which have magnetic rotating disk, semiconductor based SSDs and flash drives, which doesn't have any moving parts like hard drives, and optical storage based CDs and DVDs, which uses a beam of light to read or write data. Now you've got a general idea of primary storage and secondary storage and how they are different from each other. Let's get a little bit deeper to understand it better. Primary storage is also divided into two categories, RAM and ROM, which stands for random access memory and read-only memory. RAM is called random access memory because CPU can access any memory cell directly without accessing it sequentially. One of the major differences between RAM and ROM is that RAM is volatile memory, means that when you power off your computer, the data stored in RAM is erased, so it's also called temporary memory. While on the other side, ROM is permanent memory or non-volatile memory, and stored data doesn't changes and remains same always because this is the read-only memory and you can't write on this memory. ROM contains important system files that required for system to boot up, and it also performs major input-output tasks of computer. Different type of ROM includes masked ROMs. These are the very first inexpensive hardwired devices that contain pre-programmed set of data or instruction. Another type of ROM is PROM, means programmable ROM. This type of ROM can be modified only once by the user and not erasable. User buys a blank PROM and write program on it. Another type of ROM is EPROM, means erasable and programmable ROM. This type of ROM is erasable by exposure of UV light. Another type is EEPROM, means electrically erasable and programmable read-only memory. EEPROM is programmed and erased electrically. It can be erased and reprogrammed about 10,000 times. Both erasing and programming takes about 4 to 10 milliseconds. Let's see about RAM. RAM is also of different types like SRAM and DRAM, which stands for static random access memory and dynamic random access memory. The difference between these is the way they store data. Dynamic RAM means DRAM, which stores bits in cells consisting of capacitor and a transistor, needs to be periodically refreshed, while SRAM contains data bits in its memory as long as power is being supplied and doesn't need to be refreshed because it doesn't contain capacitors. This makes SRAM significantly faster than DRAM. Therefore, static RAM is used to create CPU cache memory, while dynamic RAM forms the largest system RAM space. So dynamic RAM is mostly used as primary memory because it's cheaper and have high capacity than SRAM. But this doesn't end here. DRAM also have different types like SDRAM, RDRAM, DDR-SDRAM, SGRAM, etc. Among these RAM, DDR-SDRAM is currently most used, which stands for Double Data Rate Synchronous Dynamic Random Access Memory. Different versions of DDR-SDRAM are DDR1, DDR2, DDR3, DDR4, out of which DDR4 is the fastest.